My name's Nick Bethard, and I'm a senior sales engineer at Atlona. And the session today will be focused on easy to use divisible spaces in Velocity. So, if you guys have been, paying attention to the previous instances of this series, parts 1 through 3, we've been talking about the Atlona IP meeting space. This is our concept IP meeting space that is intended to really enable flexibility and scalability. So, this concept at a high level, we're thinking about a large conference room. We're thinking about, well, it's a large conference room, and a lot of times these large conference rooms have to be divisible, into two smaller conference rooms, so that companies can make efficient use of these spaces. It has to be extremely easy to use. That's an absolute must. Customers just won't use the functionality. End users won't use the functionality unless it's extremely easy and intuitive to use. It also needs to support soft codecs. 3, 4, 5 years ago, this wasn't an issue. We just had to deal with hard codecs, but now we have soft codecs, such as Skype for Business. We also have the kind of semi-soft codecs like Zoom Room, but we also still have hard codecs like Cisco Telepresence. And we need to be able to support all of these things seamlessly and smoothly. And lastly, the thing needs to be scalable, right? Companies don't want to invest in what we call, forklift upgrade stuff, where, they're buying exactly what they need for that day. And if they ever want to change it or expand it, then they're going to have to forklift all of that gear out and bring new gear in. They want to be able to take that gear and continue to use it for a long time and just scale up if they need to. So previously, we talked about how to configure auto input switching on OmniStream. We talked about USB routing. We talked about configuring macros based on events to do things like USB routing as a result of input auto switching. Now today, we're going to be talking about how to use Velocity to split the room into multiple usable spaces easily and seamlessly. So, really the focus today is around this partition wall and using Velocity to do things based on what that partition, if the partition wall is open or closed. So let's take a second and, think about our all IP meeting space and what does it look like when the room is open? What's in the room? What equipment is sitting out there in the room? Either sitting visible on the table or mounted underneath the table or mounted on the wall or whatever. Obviously, we have the encoders, right? These are the devices taking your inputs. We've also got, as we talked about before, we've got input auto switching set up on these encoders so that effectively a user could come and sit down at any place on the table. And here in this example, we've got 4 encoders, that's 8 separate inputs. The user could plug into any one of those inputs and have it routed automatically. We've got the decoders that are connected to TVs mounted on the walls, that are taking the inputs from the encoders and sending them out, to be displayed on the screens. Additionally, we've got USB devices. Here we have the host side USB boxes that the end user is going to plug their computer into. And again, based on where those boxes are and which input was automatically switched to that the user plugged into, the USB routing will follow that. For the USB devices, here in this example, we've got a couple of webcams, connected to USB over IP device side boxes. And then lastly, we have touch panels. We have a couple of touch panels in the room, one at each end of the room, if you will. Now, that's a lot of stuff. and we're doing a lot of things there, a lot of intelligence, with input auto switching and having the USB devices follow where the active input is automatically and all of this sort of thing. And the touch panels are mirrored. They're updating each other in real time so that as things change, the touch panels change as well together. So what's the next step? The next step is to split the room. So now we need to be able to take all of this gear and effectively chop it in two. So now instead of 4 encoders with 8 inputs, spanning the entirety of the room, we've got 2 encoders with 4 inputs each on each side of the room. We have one USB camera per side of the room. We have one touch panel per side of the room, one display per side of the room. And these become 2 completely independent spaces, so that the user can just come and they still experience the same thing that they did before. It's still the same user experience where they come and they sit down at the table and plug in their USB, plug in their HDMI, and everything routes automatically based on that, or they can do switching from the touch panel, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's still the same user experience, the difference being that it's only affecting that side of the room. It's only affecting, the customer comes in and sits down in the left side of the room and they plug in. It's only affecting things in that left side of the room. It's not affecting anything on the right side of the room. And we can do this really seamlessly and really easily because everything is out there on the network as IP. So now I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm actually going to open up Velocity and show you how you do this, and you can start to dream up all of the different things that you can do with this functionality really easily once you see and understand how this is done in Velocity. So let me switch gears here a little bit. I'm just gonna do this, and so now you guys should be seeing my control panels, and this thing, I'm going to go ahead and bring up Velocity and show you what I have set up. So what you can see is kind of a somewhat simplified version of the all IP meeting space concept that we were talking about just a minute ago. Instead of 4 encoders, I've got 2 encoders, but I've still got 2 decoders. I'm not showing any USB stuff here just to simplify things for the purposes of this webinar, but that can certainly be added. I have my 2 displays, my left monitor and my right monitor. And then I have 2 control surfaces, left control and a right control. And instead of using actual physical Atlona touch panels, like you would in a lot of cases, what I'm doing here is I'm using web browsers. So I've got one web browser open for one control panel and a different one open for a different control panel. That way you can see the 2, the left and right control surfaces right there on your screen without me having to pull up a webcam and showing you a video of a touch panel. So if I go back here, so right now the room isn't set up to be a split room. Right now the room's just set up to be one happy room with all of this gear in it. And we can look at one of the control surfaces and we can see that, right? We can see we have 4 inputs. We have 2 dual channel encoders, that's 4 inputs, and we have our 2 outputs. And if I bring up the other control panel, you can see that as I drag inputs, that both control surfaces update each other concurrently, right? I can do, left input here and it updates on both sides, right? No big deal, right? That's pretty straightforward. If these were 2 physical touch panels, you would see the exact same thing, no difference. So now let's go and set this thing up as a split room and see what happens. So we're just going to go in here to the room control options, and if we scroll down to the bottom, you see there's an option that says enable split room. So I'm going to go ahead and tick that option. And now if I go back here, then we start to see a few things in the room configuration changed. Nothing has changed yet on our control surface because we haven't set anything up to change yet. But if we scroll down, now we see an option on the control surfaces for what section they're controlling. So if I'm going to go ahead and set my left control touch panel to control the left section and my right to control the right section. And that's going to automatically update the touch panels. But again, nothing has changed yet because the room is still open. So it's just like it was before. There's no difference yet. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to tell the velocity which inputs on the encoders I want to be available to the left side of the room and which I want to be available to the right side of the room. Or you can also have inputs that you can select to be available to all sides of the room at all time. So let's just go in here. We'll go into our 112 encoder and see HDMI 1 is right now set to all sections and HDMI 2 is set to all sections. We're going to go ahead and change that to left and save. So basically that means that this encoder is only available to the left side of the room. And again, nothing's changed on my control surface because the room is still open. The room's not closed yet, so nothing changes. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my other encoder and I'm going to change it to the right side of the room. And this is a 512 encoder. I'm just using R-type, the R-type series because that's what I had handy. It can be 112s or 512s, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to hit save, and that's going to update that to be the right side encoder. Now, I need to define the monitors, which side the monitors go on. So I'm going to go in here, and right now you see this monitor set to be for all sections. So I'm going to go ahead and make this the left monitor, save. I forgot to do one thing. I need to make it so that the input is only available to the left side of the room. Because you can actually have, if we start getting really fancy, you can have a monitor that's available to all sides of the room, all sections, and then you could have individual inputs that are only available to left or right. So if you have a multi-monitor or a multiple input monitor that can do fancy things like split display, you see this option down here, then we can start to utilize that functionality. We don't have that here, so we're not going to worry about it. So we just assigned this input to the left side and this monitor to the left side of the room. Now we're going to go do the same thing on the right side. Set this guy to the right side and hit save. And now the monitors are set up. And that's it. So now again, the room is still open. So guess what? We still see the same thing that we saw before we even turned split room mode on. In velocity, we still see all of the inputs and we still see all of the displays because we haven't closed the room yet. So now you're probably wondering, how do we close the room? How do you do that? Well, the short answer is you can do it any way you want. One way is you can go in here and you can scroll down and you can actually, this thing that says, is room currently split? You can tick that box and manually split the room, manually close the air wall, if you will. We're not going to do that here because I'm going to show you a more interesting way to do it. We can do it using a room trigger. Now, this room trigger could be anything. It could be contact closure based on an air wall being closed. It could be a button, physical button that somebody presses. It could be a control signal from, a third-party control system if they have that. It could be anything you want. And that's what room triggers is all about. Previously we talked about macros. We talked about event macros. Macros being a sequence of commands that you're going to trigger when you press a button on the control surface. Event macros being a sequence of events or commands that you're going to trigger based on something happening. And then a room trigger is sort of like an event macro that happens based on a trigger, based on an external event. And so in this case, we're going to go ahead and go in here. I have one configured already. To open the room, let's go ahead and configure the closed room in real time. So what I've done, I've also added a generic TCP driver here just to use to trigger the room to open and close. And I'm using Hercules, simple free third-party program as a TCP server to connect. So I'm going to connect my generic TCP driver here, and I'm going to say my trigger response, I want it to equal the string, and I'm going to say close. So that means that when Velocity receives that string from my TCP server, that it's going to execute this macro. And we're going to define that macro right now. And so to close the room, it's very, very simple. All we do is we select Velocity, and look at that, it's already on closed room. You can do lots of things, but we want it on closed room. And we select our room, our tinkering room that we're in right now, and that's it. That's all we have to do. Now, if I hit apply settings, now it's saved. So now that's a room trigger that we can go and use. And let's do that right now. So let's bring up the control surfaces again. So I have my left control surface and I have my right control surface. So the edge window is the right surface and the Chrome window is the left surface. And let's bring up Hercules. So I've already got close typed in here. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to click in there and I'm just going to send it. And oops. What am I doing? Why doesn't it want to send? What am I doing wrong? Okay, it's connected. There we go. There's a close button that Hercules is not being nice to me. It's hiding right there. Sorry about that little technical difficulty. So you see, whenever I hit close, look what happened. Like magic. Now only the left inputs are available on the left side of the room and only the left monitor is available. And on the right side of the room, only the right inputs are available and only the right monitor is available. Now, if I go back to Hercules and I tell it open, and I hit this little button that's semi-hidden, now it goes back to an open state. And so now we're back to the two touch panels being, connected to one another and everything, updates, together. And if we go back to close, now you can see if I change inputs over here, I guess it's already on input 2, let's change to input 1. You see nothing changes over here. It's completely independent. They're like two separate rooms at this point. Pretty cool. So the other thing that I want to mention is, we talked about event macros, previously, and, having event macros trigger based on something happening. And now that the room's split, we need a little bit more logic, right? Because what if you want an event macro to only happen if the room's split or if the room's open? And what if you want it to only happen to one side of the room or the other? Easy. Now that we've enabled split room, now you see this thing called room state here. And if we go ahead and add a new macro, we can see these checkboxes that we can make. So if we say we want to, set up, something based on input auto switching, so active source, and I'm going to say right input 1 and, going to the right monitor. And we want this event macro to only execute when it's in split room mode and only on the right side of the room, then we just check those boxes. It's easy. And then we build our macro or event macro just like we did before, no difference. If you wanted it to be a macro that happens only when the room's in open state, then you just check open. and then you build your macro just like you did, before we even started messing with this, this split room stuff. Easy. So it's, just slight change to what you're doing, and now you've got split room. Easy.